All right, everybody, welcome to Wednesday Night Live. Thanks for tuning in. I am pumped that you're here. Tonight, we're continuing our mini-series on the Beatitudes, these 8 short, counterintuitive, countercultural sayings of Jesus where he says blessed, but he uses the word makarios, which means happy, fulfilled, completely at peace. Blessed are those who fill in the blank. And then he keeps on filling in the blank with things we wouldn't expect. Things that don't always feel very blessed or very happy to us. We've talked about the first two on the last 2 Wednesdays. Blessed are the poor in spirit, and blessed are those who mourn. And tonight we're going to take a look at the third one, which is actually pretty closely related to those two. In Matthew 5, verse 5, Jesus says, "Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth." Happy, fulfilled, at peace are those who are meek. So what in the world does Jesus mean by that? Because when we hear meek, we think weak, wimpy, easily taken advantage of and trampled on, and everything about that kind of flies in the face of American culture, where strength and dominance and self-will are these cardinal virtues that we want to live up to. And here's Jesus inviting us to live weak lives, telling us that will set our hearts at peace. How? Well, the key is to understand what Jesus is really saying. The word that Matthew uses, that we translate meek here, is the Greek word praus. And it doesn't really have a good one-to-one English cognate. It's hard to translate. It means meek, but in the sense of meekness being a humility that acknowledges one's own insufficiency and inability. It's a sense of weakness that's not about being trampled on or taken advantage of as much as it is a sense of weakness that says, my problems are beyond me. I really don't have what it takes to save myself, to conquer every single obstacle that's out in front of me, to reconnect myself to a God my sin has cut me off from. See, when you begin to realize that your problems are bigger than you, and I think a whole bunch of us have realized that, maybe now more acutely than ever during this season of a global pandemic. And also when you begin to realize that the junk in your life and the issues in your life aren't just everybody else's fault, that you can't blame everything on your parents or your genetics or your boss or your spouse, just everybody else, but instead you got to blame yourself, your own sin and your own brokenness. The question is, what do you do with that? I think you got a couple options at that point. One is you can say, yeah, my problems are bigger than me and it's killing me. I realize I can't do enough to earn my way back to God, even though I should. So I'm just going to beat myself up. I'm going to wallow in guilt and self-pity. I'm going to let my shame crush me. I'm going to feel awful and just be angry about it at the entire world. Or you can choose a spirit of meekness. You can humble yourself in the face of your own brokenness, your sin, and the pain you've caused, and find yourself strangely at peace rather than discouraged. And that may sound really weird, so let me explain. When you're truly meek, when that type of humility regarding your inability permeates your soul, you get a bigger picture of the love of God, and it does something profound inside of you. Because your initial response to sin is always going to be a selfish one. That's part of being human. We're selfish. Being concerned with me is the only way I know how to be. We're always going to start by saying, oh man, I'm such a wreck. I'm so messed up. I'm a failure. Now I'm never going to be who I want to be. I'm never going to reach all my goals. I'm the worst. And for some of us, we know that feeling. And when we see our sin and we respond that way, and then we mistakenly call that repentance. We come to God and say, God, I'm the most awful, most worst human who ever lived. I'm a total loser. And we think that's what he wants from us. But you guys, that's not repentance. That's self-pity. And it doesn't originate out of our humility. It comes from our pride. Our wounded pride, but still our pride. And if that's the place that our sorrow, your sorrow, my sorrow over sin is coming from, man, we are not meek. We're still not grasping the bigger picture, the greater story that's going on. And don't get me wrong, it's okay to be upset about your sin and angry at the things that you've done. Angry at the fact that you're imperfect. But if that drives you to feel sorry for yourself and subsequently to be mad at everyone else, that's not the same as coming to God and saying, Father, I'm broken. I have messed up and I'm sinful and I'm sorry for the hurt that I caused you. Like, instead of wallowing in self-pity, it's a whole different ballgame to come to God and apologize for the pain your rejection has caused to God and the hurt that it's caused to people he loved. To come to him and say, I've rebelled against you. I've hurt you. You gave me gifts. You gave me talents. You gave me abilities. I squandered all of those. I'm sorry. You know, the Apostle Paul tells us there's a kind of confession that leads to death and a kind of confession that leads to life. Confessing out of our pride for selfish reasons to feel better about you, that's missing it. But confessing out of sorrow because you know you need saving and you cannot save yourself, that's meekness. And I think maybe the way to know where you're at with that, like a good measure, a good self-test is this. When you say, or you hear somebody say, I believe that God forgives me, but I just can't forgive myself. You know, that is self-pity. That's pride. That's saying the cross may have been good enough to count for the God of the universe, but I guess I have a higher standard than him. Like when you say that, you're primarily concerned about how you feel. And what you're ultimately saying is, look, I am too proud or too angry to accept God's charity. I'm going to take only what I can earn on my own. But to be meek is to humble yourself. It's to say, I'm going to take my mind off me for a minute. Even as I confess my sin, I'm not sorry because I feel bad. I'm sorry because I offended my Creator. And I can't undo that. I'm going to humbly admit I'm too far gone. So I'm going to confess, God, I cannot save myself. And then I'm going to rely on the beautiful, incredible mercy and grace that he gives me. That's meekness. It's not weakness at all. In fact, that word praus, it was sometimes used to mean a tamed, wild animal. And I think that's a good image of what a meek person really is. Someone whose wild, self-reliant, failed instincts have been changed. Someone who's been radically set free to live a full and blessed and happy life by a God who can do for them what they cannot do for themselves. Meekness is liberating. It's beautiful. It's the humility that marks a life aimed in the direction of God's glory and relying on his power, rather than a life aimed in the direction of its own glory and relying on its own power. Like either way, we're insufficient without Jesus. But not acknowledging that, living out of our own pride, it only ends in failure, anger, and self-pity. But relying on him to be all that we cannot be. Living out of the meekness that comes from that point of view that says, I can't, but he can. It results in inheriting the earth, Jesus said. Living the lives, writing the better story for ourselves and those around us that we were made for. And so I want to encourage you guys this week, be meek.